especially those of you who were with us early. You're spreading the word about some of the webinars and the trainings that we are trying to provide on a pretty regular basis, actually. So visit our website at www.pcain.org, our Facebook page, just to kind of keep up with all the trainings that we provide. They're always free. And like I said, we have several coming up. We do a parent cafe once a month as well. So if you if you have parents that you think would be interested, or other caregivers, again, please, jump on our website, give us a call, shoot us an email, visit our social media, and all that information will be on there. But thank you so much again for continuing to be a part of what we do, and of course being a part of prevention. We want to thank the Kids First Trust Fund. They and the Department of Child Services, they both have been significant partners through the years, but especially this year. We receive a substantial amount of money from Kids First and Department of Child Services to provide these trainings and these webinars and help to support and hopefully connect with counties and councils. So we're very, very grateful to the Kids First Trust Fund. So next time you're buying those license plates, please consider Kids First. They only fund organizations whose mission is the prevention of child maltreatment. And of course, that's our mission at Prevent Child Abuse Indiana. So right now, oh, sorry, by the way, I'm Sandy Runkle, and I'm the Director of Programs at Prevent Child Abuse Indiana. But I'm going to introduce somebody far more important right now, and that is Catherine King, and she is our Program Assistant for Prevent Child Abuse Indiana. She's going to talk a little bit about some of the logistics this morning and certificates and such. So Catherine?
Hi, everyone. Like Sandy said, I'm the programs, well, they just changed my name. So I used to be administrative assistant, and that's what I still am. But anyway, if you registered as a group or a couple and you are sharing your screen with someone else, just, I guess, over in the chat box, let me know who all is in that situation. I have everyone that registered as themselves if there's just one person viewing. After our webinar, I will send you an email with a link to a survey that you'll take if you would like a training certificate for this webinar. So if you get that email and you want a training certificate, please go in and do the assessment or survey only one time, and then expect your certificate within 12 to 24 business hours afterwards. It's not automatic. So I have to go in and get your name and send you the email. But anyway, that's just pretty much everything I have. I was thinking at the end, if they have questions, they could, if you know how to raise your hand, I can see that and I can unmute you so you can ask a question. That might be a nice way to do it at the end. But if you have questions throughout the webinar, just ask those in the chat box, and Sandy and I will be looking at those as well as Jim, our speaker. So enjoy the webinar.
Thanks, Kathy. And if you're wondering, it's for most people on your Zoom, everything's at the bottom of your screen. It'll say Q&A, chat, and then there's a little hand that you can click on, and it raises it, and then we can see it in your little window. So at the end. So yes, hopefully everybody can see that. Well, again, thank you. And it is really our pleasure to introduce Dr. Jim Schroeder. Uh, Jim has presented for us in the past. In fact, I'm willing to bet some of you who were on this morning probably have jumped on. And that's maybe why you're here this morning, because you enjoyed his presentation so much. I know we have. So I think this is at least the third time that we've invited Dr. Schroeder back, and I'm sure we will continue to utilize his services as long as he puts up with us. So I just am really honored to introduce Dr. Jim Schroeder. And currently, um, Jim is the vice president of the psychology department and training director of the psychology internship and fellowship program. And prior to that, he has been a staff psychologist for St. Vincent Center for Children, the Cardinal Glennon Children's Medical Center, St. Louis University School of Medicine, St. Louis Children's Hospital, Washington University School of Medicine, and actually Jim got his Ph.D. from St. Louis University. So you can tell how many years of experience he has had in the area of pediatric psychology. He has also been featured in the Journal of Child and Family Studies, as well as Sex Roles. So it is definitely our pleasure to introduce Dr. Jim Schroeder. Jim?
Thank you. Thank you very much for that really nice introduction. And it really is a joy to kind of be back presenting for your organization. What a huge, noble cause that you have. And I just really appreciate being part of that. So starting this morning, a couple thoughts as I come from a slightly chilly but nice office here in Southern Indiana, actually Evansville. I really want two things for us today. I first want to just say thanks to all of you who've given me a little time on Friday morning to talk about something I think is so important. And I really want this to be both a story, and you'll see what I mean, and a conversation. It's really a story of me learning from so many other people who have done things so much better and much greater than I have, and understanding how that applies to our everyday life. And it's really a conversation about us thinking about things that are most important, that sometimes, to be honest, I think they're so mundane in perception, we forget they possess incredible power. And so that's why you see the title today is Turning Distress into Joy, Time-Honored, Research-Supported Methods for Improving Mood and Resiliency. One movement at a time. And I'll talk about what I mean by movements, right? But to start, a little bit more of a disclaimer about me is that you see my wonderful 8 beautiful children in front of you. They don't always look this nice and happy, and certainly not this cooperative, but it is so much of my life. In addition to being a psychologist at work, I'm certainly a psychologist and a father at home. And so our oldest kids now, you can see Emma in the middle and Zach kind of to the right, are 14 going on 15, or freshmen in high school. And then we have 4 in grade school. So we have Matthew to the far left, Noah to the far right. They're in 7th and 5th grade. Will and Lewis kind of in the center, and they are in 3rd and 1st grade. And then we have 2 at home, Sam to the left and little Kate right in the middle. She's going to be 2 in July. And so as a father of 8, it means that turning distress into joy is really important at home too. And so I hope for all of you who are parents, in addition to professionals, we'll really take the time today to kind of tell a story about what's most important and how we can be most effective in our lives. So I want us to begin with this thought. And I want you to really kind of suspend your current reality for a moment. Allow me to kind of take you through a narrative I think is really important. As since the beginning of humanity, people have struggled with difficult circumstances and experiences. And long before the advent of modern medicine and formal psychological practice, individuals used various techniques, whether they were part of faith or secular traditions, but to overcome traumatic events, to improve mood, decrease anxiety, and just to develop a better sense of resiliency for whatever challenges they had. Over the past few decades, research has increasingly indicated these strategies, which are free, which is wonderful, have specific health benefits for an individual's physical, social, and psychological well-being. And studies have indicated that when used strategically and intelligently, they can unlock healing processes that are both understood and mysterious in nature. So one of the things I think that we often get put to sleep is that we go out looking for ways to heal and ways to grow. And then we start to realize they're actually already there in front of us, but are we using them most effectively? So one thing I want to encourage as I tell this story today is please let's make it as much of a conversation as possible. Obviously, I really enjoying being in the same room with people, and that's not quite what we're today. But use the chat line, use the Q&A. In fact, I'd love to know, where is everybody coming from today, who's part of this talk? What areas of Indiana or beyond, or cities or just areas are you from? Please send it through the chat.
And Jim, real quick, I put this in the chat as well, but just to let you know, we are recording this session, especially at the end, if anybody is, saying something out loud, we do want to make you aware we are recording this, and it will go up on our YouTube channel and our Facebook. So just as an FYI.
Good reminder, right? You're on tape. Birdseye, great. I was actually just through Birdseye last week on my way to Salina and Indian Lake. We were doing a father-daughter backpacking trip, and always love to get outside. So Indianapolis Speedway. My mom was born in Speedway, so I know that area well. So we see Chicago. Wonderful. Decatur, all over the state. Columbus, Indiana. I guess the architectural capital of the Indiana, correct? And I even see Evansville. Wonderful. So coming from all over today, we're going to talk about, again, how do we use these techniques and how do we use them well? And in general, how do we also make them more available for not just ourselves, of course, but not just psychologists, all of you applying these in clinical practice. So we'll go forward. So it goes without saying, but I'm going to start here, is that with distress comes a number of potential emotions, right? These are just part of the human experience. There's sadness. We feel bitterness. We feel jealous. We're suspicious of people. We have anger. We have rage. We may be hopeless. And again, in some ways, they're just part of us being human. But they can also impede joy and contentment in different ways if they take over. And I think one of the things for us to think about is that if you look at the science behind emotions, emotions like anxiety and anger were never really intended to be long-term emotions. They were intended to be emotions of action. If anxiety was present, then we need to look at ways to preserve ourselves or keep ourselves safer or move in that particular way. If we felt anger, maybe it was because something was unjust, right? Or something was going the way it shouldn't have. They were calls to action. The problem is when many of these emotions become chronic, they carry a serious price. And we know this from research, physical research and psychological research, that they really carry a great weight. And so while it's part of the human experience to feel these, the more chronic they become, the more eroding they really are, right? The more detrimental they are. And so we have to consider, how do we use these emotions in an effective way and not a destructive way? And that's what I said here. They're not meant to be the long-term experience, but rather conduits to further decision, growth, and adaptation. So before I get into these ideas of what are these movements that I'm considering, I really encourage you to check out my website, james-schroeder.com. Everything's freely available. They're written both for parents and professionals. And actually, the discussion today, the turning distress into joy, originally came out of a 5-part series that you can find on the website. And it's linked to a lot more research, a lot more things I don't have time to get into today. But before we begin, we always should consider that everything that we do positive must have a healthy framework. If we don't, we can have great intentions, we can have great desires, but it's not likely we're going to be able to sustain it or even begin it, right? And so there's an article on my website called Want to Live Drug-Free? It's Time to Live More Simply. And I would argue that the 7 kind of bullets that I have here are the absolute key framework to be able to turn distress into joy, right? We have strategies, but I know as a parent, for example, if I want to be able to be a better emotion coach for my child, I might have that great intent. But if I'm not consistently pursuing better practices in regards to my sleep or in my activity level or I'm not sometimes, creating narratives or writing about things that are difficult. If I'm not doing a lot of these things, my intentions often just fall short, right? So when you get a chance later on, it's a very short article, check this out and consider that each of these 7 areas included here actually have great research about not only how they help us physically, but they actually help us psychologically, socially, and even spiritually. So um, again, the website really has all of my articles archived, and it's got the 4 books that I've written are linked there, and they're also on Amazon. But they're all meant for one single purpose, and that really is for us to be as healthy and just holistic as possible. And so as we move, we have this framework that begins, but these set the stage for 5 necessary steps to turn distress into joy. So movement number 1, and by the way, the use of movement is this idea that very often fear and those emotions, when chronic, it basically create a situation of kind of static, just kind of a static situation where we don't have a lot of movement in the direction we need. And so when I'm using the word movement in this way, it's a sense of working through resistance, whether that resistance is fear or otherwise, and moving into a more healthy place. And so the first movement we're going to talk about is forgiveness. And I love this quote for all of you who are C.S. Lewis fans. You recognize probably just the great value that he brought and the tremendous wisdom that he brought in his writings. He once said, "Forgiving does not mean excusing. Many people seem to think it does. They think that if you ask them to forgive someone who has cheated or bullied them, they're trying to make it out that there was no cheating or bullying. But if that were so, there would be nothing to forgive. But what forgiving does mean is that you must make every effort, and again, effort is the key. We can't always control outcomes, but we can control effort, to kill every taste of resentment in your own heart, every wish to humiliate or hurt him or pay him out. You must make the effort to end that." And that's the beginning of forgiveness, right? And so I mentioned earlier that there are a number of people who have played into this presentation and this story. People I have learned from, that I have met, that you'll meet in a little later, and people that I've never met but have come so inspired. And we begin with an incredible tale of forgiveness, because on the night of January 21st, 1995, Azim Khamisa's life changed forever. While delivering pizza, his 20-year-old son, Tariq, was shot and killed by Tony Hicks, a 14-year-old gang member. Set to be married to his girlfriend, Tariq would never see his wedding day, and neither would his father. But what happens next is nothing short of miraculous. I don't know if you've ever heard this story before, and if you haven't, you really should check out the video behind it. But what actually happens next is that after all of this, you can imagine the pain that this father felt. And for a long time, he really languished in that pain. He really languished in a sense of bitterness. But he began to realize that bitterness, like I mentioned earlier, was never intended, it couldn't be a long-term emotion, because it was just destroying him. And so through a series of connections, he eventually made a connection with this individual's grandfather, the one who had killed his son. And he reached out to him in jail and eventually met him in person, began to have a series of conversations with him. And through that, he just recognized there was incredible, not just power in what he was doing, but also incredible sense of peace that was occurring. And so over time, while this was going on, he had set up a foundation and a business and organization around helping troubled teens. And he eventually invited Tony Hicks to become part of that foundation when he was let out of prison years later. And so I think to myself as a parent, I just can't imagine the pain and anguish that would come with seeing your son, your child murdered, and then what it would take to be able to set on the path of forgiveness. But it inspires me, and I think that hopefully it will inspire you today to consider this idea. So the question is, why forgive, right? I mean, sometimes, let's be honest, in our pride, kind of our self-righteousness, we're like, I don't want to forgive. I don't have an interest in forgiving. I don't like this person. I don't care about them. They can go to hell. That's what we often say if we're very honest. But I would say to you, you know what? Maybe forgiving actually is kind of self-serving. And I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way, because for starters, There's 3,000 plus scientific citations that indicate that forgiving results in greater physical and psychological health, including less anxiety, depression, and perceived stress. And I'm only talking about the forgiver. I'm not even talking about what goes on beyond that. And so sometimes people might ask themselves, well, I don't have a desire to have a relationship with this person anymore. Why would I forgive? The simple answer is it may be the healthiest thing you can do. And so we think about this, there's some key terms we need to consider about forgiveness that often maybe are misnomers or just something that we need to think about more deeply. The first is the idea of intrapersonal versus interpersonal process. Very often when people consider the idea of forgiveness, they instantly think it has to be an interpersonal process, right? But they literally have to reach out to someone that hurt them, and they have to go through the process of forgiving them in person or otherwise. And although there's a lot of great things that can come from that, forgiveness is actually doesn't start there, and nor should it ever start there. It really has to begin with a sense of intrapersonal process, which is the idea within yourself that, I really think that I need to find a sense of forgiveness. I need to pursue this. Without starting there, it's very difficult to ever reach out to a human being and begin the idea of interpersonal forgiveness. And so if you're sitting there today listening and you're thinking about this, again, remember, all of this starts within ourselves first before it goes anywhere else, if it's of value. The second is that we really need to strive towards what we call, if we're wanting to reach out towards others, it's more of an interpersonal reconciliation sentiment. And this is really difficult. If you find that you need to establish something interpersonally, there's a certain level of reconciliation that does need to occur. And I pulled this research, for many of you, and I think that you saw probably the movie years ago about the Rwandan genocide. It was such a horrific situation. Upwards of 1 million plus people were killed in that genocide in a short time. But what was also horrific about it was that those who were left alive would often have to walk through the public square and see the people that had murdered their friends and family. And they had no recourse. They had nothing they could do to change that short of moving away. What you come to find out with this research is that they had to get to a certain degree of reconciliation sentiment where they really just had to say, I may never like you, may never love you, I may despise you, but in some level, I have to forgive you. Because if I don't, excuse me, every day I see you is going to be a really difficult day. And so, in that way, seeing forgiveness as a mechanism for accepting or even embracing a different life is sometimes what it's about, right? I think all of us sitting here on this call can think of situations where our goals were clearly thwarted. We did not see things going in the direction that they were going. And the question was, do we kind of stew in misery because of that for weeks or months or years or decades? Or do we, through the use of forgiveness, accept or even embrace maybe a different one than the life that we desire, right? We have to make sure that while emotions are part of the human experience, they're not the primary decision maker in this situation. On the flip side, by the way, of those emotions I described are the emotions of things like trust and love and admiration and all of those positive emotions. And those, by the way, are intended to be long-term emotions, and the science supports that. Science indicates that the greater that we trust people and we find sources of love and joy, the happier we will be. And so, again, the question is, what do we want out of these situations? What really are our goals? So what's neat about forgiveness, though, is that it's not just this simple idea of like, well, I have to work through and find a way to make amends or do whatever, but that there's actually specific mechanisms that we are uncovering that make this even more effective just than the general idea. And one of the things I'd really encourage you guys to do when you get done is to check out the REACH model developed by Dr. Everett Worthington at Virginia Commonwealth. He's got this available through the website listed there. There's been over 25 randomized controlled trials from different labs that support its efficacy. It doesn't require extensive mental health training. And what's neat is that the self-directed workbook is actually free. And I'm going to pull from that over the next few slides. Now, the workbook itself has not been fully vetted in research trials like his primary kind of, say, treatment, but the core components from the longer training are the same thing. The other thing that really struck me was that as he was doing this research, he himself was faced with the really brutal and challenging task of forgiveness when his 76-year-old mother was murdered when someone burglarized her home. And he talks about this, and I kind of linked the article there, about how hard it was at first to kind of recognize, oh my gosh, he's dealing with this now after he's been talking about this for years and decades. But then the reality was, am I going to listen to my own advice, right? And so you should read the story about this. And it's really, again, an inspiring story about a difficult situation. So the REACH model is composed with 5 main components, which are 1, recall the hurt, 2, or E, emphasize with the one who hurt you, A, give an altruistic gift of forgiveness, C, commit to the forgiveness you experienced, and H, hold on to forgiveness when you doubt. One of the things he makes the repeated distinction between, I think this is really key to be effective in this area, is the difference between decisional forgiveness and emotional forgiveness. So decisional forgiveness involves the willful act of committing to treating the transgressor with less negativity and greater value. And the benefits include, it's actually the gateway into what we'll talk about with emotional forgiveness, but it's also the first step if there's interest towards relationship repair. And it really just, in some ways, I think improves the status of what we see ourselves, moving from someone who's holding a grudge to someone who is a forgiver. And how we see ourselves, if we're very honest, is really critical. Without that, it's hard for us to move into another step. Emotional forgiveness is associated with the feeling of forgiveness with the transgressor. And this is actually where you get into a lot of those positive benefits of improved physical health, whether it's your GI system or your immune system or cardiovascular, and improved psychological functioning. But you don't get to emotional forgiveness until you've started with decisional forgiveness. Almost never is it the other way around. So here's what I want you to do. And if you want, you can put this on text, but this is something you can also keep to yourself. I want us to take about a minute, 30 seconds or a minute, and I want you to think of a situation in your life where you felt you've been hurt. And I'm actually going to share one of mine. It's actually a story now we laugh about it. It's long since been done, but at the time it was a very hurtful situation. So let's take 30 seconds, think about the situation, and then I'm going to come back and we'll talk about this. Okay. So now that you got this idea, this experience in your mind, we're going to use a little bit of the REACH model, the self-directed workbook that he put together, and we're going to kind of just briefly work through a few of these ideas. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to offer my situation. So when I was a freshman in high school, it was at a Christmas dance. I decided that there was a girl I had a crush on for a while, and I was going to ask her out, kind of on a whim, kind of on an impulse. She actually said yes, which is shocking to me at the time. And so we started dating, and we'd been dating for about a month, and we went to a party, and I realized that she seemed to be kind of more connected to someone else there than myself. And gradually over time, through communication with a few of the friends, they basically said, you know what, she just kind of decided that she's going to break up with you and move on. And so as a freshman in high school, I was crushed, of course, and couldn't quite figure it out. And so, as time went on, kind of started to think about things a little bit more. But what I want to do is I use that situation. I'm going to apply it a little bit here. And I'm going to apply kind of how I might work through this model if I was still having difficulties with this REACH perspective. So the number one thing we do in the REACH, we begin with recall the hurt. And his quote is, "We aren't going to get anywhere if we keep telling the same story repeatedly. We need another more objective yet still true story." So in this situation, there's a series of exercises, but one of them is called giving the hurt away. And it's rewriting the story from the perspective of someone other than yourself or the transgressor. Focus on utilizing a vantage point that does not focus on the experience of victimization or the perpetrator's badness, all the negative consequences, but rather more from an objective standpoint. Okay, so I'm going to do that with my example. Standing back, if someone had seen all the details of that situation when I was a freshman, the first thing they would have said was, you really hadn't talked to her a whole lot before you asked her out. And it's maybe a little bit surprising she said yes. And as that relationship, or we'll call it kind of a relationship, continued, you realize you only called her once during that entire month from home. Now, in my defense, that was the time where cordless phones didn't exist. And when you have a bunch of siblings at home who love to listen in conversations, and there's no cell phone or anything else like that. By the way, I graduated in 1995. You know what? I didn't even want anybody to hear it. But of course, that doesn't help the relationship. And then if I start looking from more objective standpoint, I'm like, yeah, when you were at school, you didn't make a lot of efforts to really like talk to her a whole lot. Well, and of course, from my perspective, that was anxiety based or whatever. But from an objective perspective, it didn't look like you did a whole lot to really keep that relationship going, right? So as I rewrite this story from more of an objective standpoint, what I realize is that, yeah, I don't think I did a whole lot to actually maintain the relationship in the first place. And I'm starting to kind of give the hurt away. I'm like, well, she probably had a good reason to move on. So that's kind of an example, just briefly. All of you, as you're kind of thinking about this, rewrite it from a different vantage point. But that's a really powerful way of taking somewhat of the personal emotion out and just considering it more objectively. So then, number 2, which is the empathize with the one who hurt you, Worthington says, we all do things for what we believe at the time might be good reasons. These might not seem like good reasons to people we've hurt, but because we have all had this experience of hurting others, even with the best of intentions, we can understand that the person who hurt us probably had what she or he believed to be good reasons. So one of the exercises here is what we call we do things for reasons. And this exercise focuses on understanding the reasons of why we hurt someone in the past, how we justified it, and how the other person might have perceived it differently, right? If we're honest, my gosh, I can think of so many reasons why my siblings growing up, I was convinced that they were wrong and I was right. And whether I was putting them in a wrestling move or I was saying things that were mean, it's because I thought they deserved it, right? Like I'm hurting them and I justified it because they annoyed me. The reality is that I'm not so sure that's actually true in a lot of instances, but I use that to rationalize why I hurt others. And so as you go through this exercise, you realize, okay, you've done some hurting yourself. And so before you come down too hard on the person who's hurt you, you might consider what you've done before too, right? So that's kind of the empathize part of this model. And this one, I think, maybe one of the most difficult, but I think is such an important one. And he calls it give an altruistic gift of forgiveness. And his quote is, in thinking about how you felt when you were forgiven, or about how good it feels to simply do something altruistic that a person does not deserve, wouldn't you like to forgive the person who hurt you? Okay, I guess that we would, although sometimes we may not feel like it. But if you ask yourself that question, right, wouldn't you like to forgive the person who hurt you? I'd love to have that incredible power. So I'm going to say yes. And one of the exercises here is that it says we are all capable of wrongdoing. And he actually has this story in the workbook, and I'm going to read this. It's incredibly powerful. And it's just simply used for us to reflect on this reality and how it pertains to our own situations. So Yanel Denier was a Holocaust survivor who was a witness during the trial of the infamous Nazi war criminal Adolf Eichmann. Denier entered the courtroom and stared at the man behind the bulletproof glass, the man who had presided over the slaughter of millions. The court was hushed as the victim confronted a butcher of his people. Suddenly, Denier began to sob and collapsed to the floor. But not out of anger or bitterness. As he explained later in an interview, what struck him was the terrifying realization, quote, I was afraid about myself. Denier said, I saw that I am capable to do this, exactly like he. In a moment of chilling clarity, Denier saw the skull beneath the skin. Eichmann, he concluded, is in all of us. tell you what, when I first read that passage, and even today, it gives me chills. I mean, it takes on such a raw, just tragic circumstance. But I think the aspect of just the sense of that awareness is incredible. Imagine this. He suddenly recognized that we're all capable of horrible things. And he wasn't justifying it, but I think he was normalizing it. And I think that in reality, he was really speaking of what if we were really honest with ourselves, we all need to recognize. And so in this particular component, it's simply a reflection on this passage and what it means for you and I in our lives. We're so quick to point out all the ways that people hurt us and they do things wrong. But do we realize we have that capacity too? I dare say I don't think that we do. The fourth is to commit the forgiveness you experience. And as he says, we can move through the reach forgiveness steps once, and it probably won't erase our bad feelings about the transgression, but it will lighten them. Through repeated washings, we become free of the negative, unforgetting feelings. So one of the exercises is, what if emotional forgiveness isn't complete? And this focuses on exercises related to the feelings of partial or limited forgiveness, and also situations where the transgressor committed multiple acts against you, and how you don't need to forgive every hurtful act individually to still have forgiven that person. It's interesting, about weeks and months after, my girlfriend, that she broke up with me in that freshman year, I definitely had these periods of like, gosh, I'm really angry about this. And there were, over time, I forgave her, and I did recognize there were a lot of components that I simply just didn't really offer. But you know what? There were times where that sense of like emotional unforgiveness would come back. And I think that we have to be aware of that, that we can only commit ourselves to something. We can't control the emotions that come through it sometimes. Now, that's what we want. But like I tell my kids when they come in my office, we're allowed to have the emotions that we have and the thoughts that we have, right? But what we really want to do is to consider what's the most effective thing that we can do when we experience the emotions and thoughts as they are, right? And so what if emotional forgiveness isn't complete? Well, that's the reality sometimes. It doesn't mean that we haven't made progress. And finally, hold on to forgiveness when you doubt. I love this quote. You have a choice about your emotions. You can hold on to your unforgiving emotions, or if you have replaced those with love or empathy or sympathy or compassion, you can now hold on to your emotional forgiveness, even in the face of powerful events that demand that you give up that emotional forgiveness. One of my favorite people of all time, I've never met him. He passed away, I think, in the mid to late 90s, but he has had a dramatic impact on my life, and probably some of you listening today, is a person by the name of Viktor Frankel. He was a psychiatrist, neurologist who, unfortunately, he and his family were taken into the Holocaust in the concentration camps, and only he and his sister escaped. His parents died and his wife died in the camps, and he wrote a book that I'm sure some of you have read. And if you haven't, I consider it being one of the top 5 most important books I've ever read in my life, and how it takes on suffering, inevitable suffering, and how it takes on meaning in life. And the book is called A Man's Search for Meaning. But one of the quotes, and this is undoubtedly one of the top 3 most important quotes of my life. In fact, somebody gave me a little rock that sits on my desk. Actually, right here. I see it every day. I often use it with my clients. And the quote is this: the last of the human freedoms is to choose one's own attitude in any given set of circumstances. The last of the human freedoms is to choose one's own attitude in any given set of circumstances. When I first learned about him, I recognized his circumstances meant death in concentration camps for most of the people he loved. It meant years of being taken away from where he grew up. It meant a life upturned. And I thought to myself, if he can choose this, in fact, if he can choose forgiveness, which by the way is what he chose, I in my life, even with my challenges, can choose forgiveness too. And I just over the years, since kind of getting to know him and through his writings and everything else, I've had this great sense of synergy that if he can do it, so can I. And if he can do it, so can you, right? And so that's what we really need to take in at the end of this model, is that Hold on to that forgiveness. Remember, love and empathy and sympathy and compassion are the emotions that we want to have permeate through us all our lives. And we're not always going to feel that way, but we can hold on to a sense of forgiveness, sense of those emotions when we desire to. And so that's really the REACH model and much of what it talks about. But please check that out. It's a wonderful model. Please use it for yourself and for others. It's free. It's there available. And if you seek out more training, I'd love to hear from you, hear about your experiences. So movement number 2, as we move on, is channeling. And by channeling, I'm not talking about channeling of the spirits, but channeling of our, we'll see, energies and emotions. And I love this quote from Shane Niemeyer, quote, "A fine line separates our angels from our demons." So Shane Niemeyer had just tried to hang himself, and it too had failed. Like much of his life to that point, which had been spent in and out of state custody since his adolescent years, his road had hit a dead end. But in the depths of his despair, thoughts of a different kind surfaced, with one idea in mind: Iron Man. Sitting in a straitjacket, awaiting sentencing as a homeless heroin addict, he had turned the pages of an endurance magazine to pass the time. As he began to read more about triathlons, there was something about the discipline, the drive, the pursuit of a difficult goal which began to consume him. The thought entered his mind, maybe he could be one of them. Maybe his life could change forever. Well, what happens next is nothing short of miraculous. And what happens is that he eventually gets out of jail and he starts training. And he starts recognizing that all of these urges, these desires that led me to use drug use and all of this crime could be channeled into an activity that was so much, obviously, more healthy and positive, but in the end gave him a purpose. And so I think it was within 6 months or a year, he finished his first half Ironman. And within a year or two had finished an Ironman. And I've been blessed to finish one myself. And so I know the training that's required. For those who don't know, an Ironman is a 2.4 mile swim, followed by a 112 mile bike, and followed by a 26.2 marathon at the end, all before midnight. And so eventually he not only trained and did these, but he became a coach. And to this day, as far as I know, he's an elite training coach in Colorado at one point, recognizing that, I always had these urges and desires, and they took me to the place I didn't want to go. Now maybe I can use them to take me to the place where I'd rather go. And that is a great example of channeling. But why channel for all of us? For those of us who have been fortunate to not be in prison or have those situations, well, you know what? Because bred of genetic underpinnings or individual experiences or our surroundings or cultures, influences, we all have a unique energy that begins to manifest itself early in our lives, right? We can talk about its desires or urges or compulsions or curiosities or drives or interests. I don't care what name you give it, but the reality is this energy gradually becomes known as part of our personality. In actuality, it's a dynamic daily interplay of what I'll simply call drives. And it's ever evolving, and it's a unique sense of self that interfaces with the world in which we live, right? What we do with it becomes of ultimate importance, because especially when it can cause distress. So I want you on the chat line real quickly, if you're willing to share, what kind of drives do you have? What are the drives? And I don't even want to define it further than that. Feel free to just post what drives you in life. What are the things that you want? I want to see what you say on the chat line. Don't be afraid. Just put it out there. Closeness with family. Absolutely. What else? Being successful in your business. What else? Who has a drive to feel joyful? I'm going to start very basically. Who wants to feel loved? Who wants to feel purpose? I see the dread of leaving this life without having left enduring contribution. Absolutely. I have this deep drive in me to use my days to create a legacy that long after I'm gone, it matters, right? Determination to be close to people in your home. You have a drive for relationships, right? To make a difference in a child's life. If we're honest, we are full of drives. We're full of urges. And I think sometimes we get so caught up in like how they can go wrong that I could guarantee you, I could put out 10 things, 10 aspects of who we are, and almost every one of you would embrace them, right? There's just a sense of like these deep internal drives that sometimes we don't really even know where they come from, but they're there. And that's what we're talking about with channeling. And so the interesting thing about the research behind this is that there are more and more ideas of how channeling can be really effective, right? I'm gonna give you, you can read these examples, but for example, there's been a study of professionals indicated that those who showed the greatest transformation from negative emotions at the beginning of your day to positive ones at the end actually had the greatest creative output. Somehow they found a way to channel that negative emotion into a positive emotion, and then they were much more productive, right? They found that envy can be actually good if you channel it in a way to understand exactly what it is that another individual has that you don't have, right? Is it fitness? Is it popularity? Like, what do they have that I don't have? And then you use it to discern or compel action steps needed to accomplish goals, right? Loss, although no one wants to lose people close to us or lose things that are important, can actually be a conduit to be used, and you'll see this in some examples to follow, can be channeled into long-term positive feelings of gratitude about things we didn't even think about before, and on and on and on. It's not a matter of having these emotions or these drives or urges. It's a matter of what we do with them. And I really believe in all the research I've done in my clinical work, that one of the things that we need to do as professionals is not tell people to stop doing something, but rather tell them how to do something using what they already have much better, right? We all get frustrated at our kids. This is what, I'm speaking about preventing child abuse. We can't just tell parents, you can't do this. We really have to give them simple ways every single day to channel their emotions and frustrations. And I know that's what you're doing through a lot of your trainings. And so that's wonderful, but we have to continue to be more creative, right? We can't be afraid to push the envelope and help people channel in a positive way. So here's ideas for channeling. These are very simple ones. And there's an endless number, but stress gets channeled into a run. That happens to me on a regular basis. Worry gets morphed into cleaning. Anger gets sublimated into mindfulness. Sadness becomes a journal entry. By the way, I know I put that framework out earlier about one of the things was creating negative or narratives about our lives. I think if you ever look back at some of the most time-honored books, right? Anne Frank's telling of the Holocaust or the Civil War journals that are published, what you find is that people have been using writing from the beginning of the day. Whether they knew it or not, they were channeling a lot of their difficult emotions into something that could create a narrative. And the research on writing is actually really fascinating, which is that if you're feeling really good, writing doesn't do a whole lot to enhance that or sustain it or create more. But if you're feeling really negative, there's a whole body, and by the way, just search my website on expressive writing, you'll find it. There's a huge body of research that indicates that expressive writing, creating basically a narrative that kind of makes sense to us, has tremendous potential for physical, psychological, and social improved well-being. So writing is something that I think we don't give the light of day, but it's a powerful tool. And again, it's free, right? Mowing the yard. I have to be honest, my day is rather complex, given a life as father of 8 and a psychologist. Sometimes I just love mowing the yard because I feel like I can actually do it well. I don't know if anybody else is laughing at me right now, but by the end of it, I'm pretty comfortable. I can get the yard done, whereas other parts of my life just may not go well. Doing the dishes is another one. I don't mind doing the dishes. I can just do it and do it well. In fact, on the chat line, I'd love to hear you. What's something that you can just do simply well that gives you satisfaction that in your complex day might alleviate negative emotions? I'd be curious to know. What are some simple ways to channel that all of you use? Walking the dogs. You can do it well, right? Your dogs probably love you and they don't even know what went on with your day. Dishes, art projects, singing. Yeah, I'm a horrible singer, but I love doing it. So my kids just laugh at me and I don't really care. Laundry. Absolutely. Right? what we're doing is we're just exercise. Yeah, I mean, exercise, just it's absolute, got to be active people. Vacuuming. My wife wishes that I was better at vacuuming. She would really appreciate that. Nubian goats. We just had a friend drive down to Florida to pick up a goat recently and bring it back up as they're going to add to their huge group. Cleaning and fishing. Love it. So here's what we're doing. We aren't telling ourselves not to do something. And this is what I mean by this. Incredible potential for self-control is likely not possible unless we channel. And that's the message here. So we go forward with it. Movement number 3. No one is useless in this world who lightens the burdens of another. And so the idea of helping others is forever one way to take our distress and turn into joy. So there's an incredible tale of helping others. You may have, some of you might have heard about this, because the person who writes this is actually, her name is Ashley Bergenschmidt. She was the principal of the year in Indiana, the elementary school principal of the year, for good reason. But sadly, Ashley's life was changed forever years ago. And as she says on her website, Kate Bergenschmidt was an energetic, driven, and kind-hearted 11-year-old who impacted all who had the privilege of knowing and loving her. But on July 26, 2015, Kate's Bomb Squad 14 won a softball game early in the morning, and Kate and some of her teammates went to one of their houses to hang out between games. Tragically, Kate died there in an ATV accident. With one phone call that Ashley received, one ordinary day, life as we knew it changed forever. This is actually taken from her website, Play for Kate. For all of you, again, who are parents, I don't know, some of you probably have experienced the death of one of your children. It's the worst thing you can imagine. And so Ashley will describe that she was just completely inconsolable for not just days or weeks, but even longer. And she just went through this period of sense like, oh, Lord, this is completely unfair and I can't carry on. But carry on she did. And what she recognized was that one of the ways she was going to go through a healing process, not life will never be the same. I mentioned before about forgiveness is often embracing or at least accepting a life different than how we intended. The idea here is that life was never going to be the same, but what she could do was to take that horrible situation and turn it to good for others. And so she has become an advocate across the nation in regards to ATV safety. And I don't need to read all of this, but you see it in front of you. All of these things and more have occurred out of a horrible tragedy, right? The idea was she had no ability to change the event for what it was, but she did have the ability to go forward in a different way and hopefully help others, right? And as she says, in just an email to me, this was a little ways back, you have to make your heart bigger than the hole that was left after the tragedy. You have to make decisions out of love. You can't look at life and think I have nothing left to give because of our tragedy. How we deal with death is at least as important as how we deal with life. What we do on earth matters. It sets our course for eternity. Empower people, offer hope, try to bring meaning to the pain. That's how I continue to survive. And so helping others has been so much of what has helped the Brugenschmidts find joy again. It's not that she doesn't experience pain, continuously in certain ways, but what she's chosen is to help others to learn how to forgive too, so that she doesn't find herself wallowing in distress. And what a message to us. What a story. And having known her personally, I know she lives this out each day. So why helping others? Well, you know what? There's a huge body of research. Again, this is the great thing about all these things, is the research is massive. That volunteering and helping others is not just good for the person you're volunteering towards or to, but even more so for yourself. And it suggests that whether it's psychological adjustment, improved mood, especially later in life, volunteering is one of the best things that we can do, as long as you don't go overboard, as long as you take care of your basic needs too. It really appears that the level of empathy as a precursor is also kind of the predictor for the individual's level of altruism. So we have to develop empathy for other people sometimes, and sometimes the acts of volunteering in and of themselves help us develop that even better. But the keys here is that volunteering really seems to tap into what's called eudaimonic well-being as opposed to hedonic well-being, right? So there's nothing wrong necessarily with hedonic well-being. The example would be, let's say you go out, get a Blizzard from Dairy Queen. Boy, I tell you what, Blizzards are pretty good. And they taste good and they feel good at the moment for the most part, right? That's hedonic well-being. You feel good. You feel good, you eat the Blizzard. But when the Blizzard is gone, usually those feelings are probably gone pretty quickly. Eudaimonic well-being is feeling good about ourselves and what we're doing, in contrast to just feeling good. And that's what volunteering seems to do. It brings in a sense of feeling good about ourselves. And it also brings in the sense of what we call mattering, right? Mattering is this idea that we really do matter to other people. You know, it brings us into communion with other people, even if we don't feel like we're in communion with the people that we want to be. I think that's one thing that's really hard in life, is that so often we desire relationships with certain people in ways that we don't get. And so what do? Well, there's always an ability to be in communion with people, even if it's not the ones you desire most. And that's where volunteering can take us to a better place. Movement for gratitude. It's a beautiful quote for Robert Emmons and Robin Stern, who've done a lot of research in this area. True gratefulness rejoices in the other. Its ultimate goal is to reflect back the goodness that one has received by creatively seeking opportunities for giving. The motivation for doing so resides in the grateful appreciation that one has lived by the grace of others. In this sense, the spirituality of gratitude is opposed to a self-serving belief that one deserves or is entitled to blessings that he enjoys. And so they really, when looking through all of this research, well, I'm going to start with the story about this. And the story is an incredible tale. And John Fott, by the way, was born without arms. And he talks about in his book, the book is, I think, entitled, What's Your Excuse? He was born in Southern Illinois. He describes the story in front of you where his mom basically said, after a series of events, you're going to figure this out. Like, you're going to figure out how to deal with what you need to do in your room. Or you cannot keep wallowing in this sense of self-pity. And so in a moment John later described as one of the most important in his life, his mother literally walked out of the room to leave him to put his clothes on, and he failed. But lying naked on the floor all alone, he suddenly accepted that the miracle he had so desperately wanted, which was to have arms, was not going to happen. And it brought him to the point at which I realized that my anger at God had only brought me no relief and only further pain. And so in his book, he details his unlikely progress to a sense of gratitude for the following. One, for moments of tough love and for many people willing to help, for opportunities to take on new challenges and experience natural surroundings. But most of all, he illustrates how growing up with no arms offered him an unusual chance to discover a unique perspective, unique calling that ultimately helped him overcome many fears and obstacles. What may seem strange to most people is that John Fopp eventually became thankful he had no arms, even though much of his life would have been easier with them, right? And so it's a really interesting thing to think about, because gratitude itself actually has a lot of positive effects if used strategically. Whether it's decreased blood pressure or improved immune functioning, you can find that gratitude, even more than other strategies, is particularly effective, but there are certain things that can increase its effectiveness. It's found that even PTSD levels are negatively correlated with post-trauma gratitude, independent of trauma severity, chronicity, time elapsed. Basically, gratitude not only improves intrapersonal benefits for the gracious person, it provides interpersonal connection for those who've been traumatized. But the important thing is, when we talk about gratitude, is also recognize what true gratitude is not. It's not false positivity. It's not denying negative emotions. That's not helpful. You need to be real with yourself about how you feel and what's really going on. It's not condoning atrocities or maltreatment. It's not saying that something was good when it was not good, even if outcomes from that might be positive. It's not being tragically idealistic or optimistic or blind to obvious realities, and it's not eroding appropriate standards for human behavior, right? That's not true gratitude. True gratitude is seeing things as a realist, but then also recognizing that what I see in front of me may not be the only story, and that sometimes I am like a horse with blinders, and I can't see the other positive things that are going on or have been going on without taking a broader field of vision. So evidence suggests that repeated acts of gratitude are most likely to be associated with long-term benefits. But a few strategies, and you should really read the book there's a couple books by Robert Emmons, I think I included at the end, which are great books. The more specific and the more details you acknowledge in your thankfulness, the more likely your gratitude, the positive effects of your gratitude will be greater. The more likely you emphasize areas of gratitude that resulted from unexpected or new circumstances, even more than your regular events, the more likely the effects will be positive. So if something unexpectedly happened that day, you got something nice from your coworker, or something happened in general you weren't predicting. Really think about that. Like, think about how many events in your life happened when you didn't predict it and how much this ends up mattering, right? And that's like a third one. Consider what life would have been like if positive events had not occurred. I always joke that after my experience freshman year, it was later, I think it was a junior, and I was asking people out to prom, and I got rejected a couple of times at prom. And eventually, this one girl decided that I think she felt sorry for me, and that she was open to going with me to prom. Well, 30 years later, that woman is my wife and the mother of our 8 children. Thank God I got rejected the first few times, right? So again, think of the unexpected things that led to so much better, right? And regular journaling, just like the expressive writing about gratitude, creates a discipline of happiness that can last a lifetime. I'll admit that I keep trying to put this in place in our family, and we've done a few things, but I really want to look forward to the day when we are regularly having kind of an open family journal of thankfulness, because there's a lot of positive benefits there. So by the way, on the chat here, as I go on to the next one, what are all of you most grateful for today? Right now, throw it on the chat line for me. Life. Amen. My wife. What else? Family, kids, family's health, coworkers, husband, family and God, positive outlook. What's interesting, by the way, about the positive outlook comment? I want to kind of just talk about this briefly. Research has looked at all the different things that human beings want, which seem important to us, whether it's our own health or relationships or financial stability, success. But they have repeatedly found that there is one thing above all that most people desire. And actually, this is very much what we're talking about today. And that thing is peace of mind. Even above everything else, people desire a sense of peace, right? That's what they really desire. So as we end our movements, the last movement is Transcendence. It was not the dawn flooding the bay with splendor which woke Frederick. Rather, it was the gradual awareness of flaming words all around him, living things that carried him down wide rivers and over mountains and across spreading plains. Then it was people who were with him, black men, very tall, big and strong. They turned up rich earth as black as their broad backs. They hunted in forests, some of which were in cities, whole cities of black folks. They were free. They went wherever they wished. They worked as they planned. They even flew like birds, high in the sky. He was up there with them, looking down on earth, which seemed so small. He stretched his wings. He was strong. He could fly. He could fly in a flock of people. There's this beautiful passage from the story of Frederick Douglass. And as he's transcending all this heartache and this just horrible circumstances, he's literally feeling himself in the sky, right? The sky with these birds, a sense of like being disconnected from the pain and the struggle. And I love this, and it moves me. And again, thinking about how difficult his life was, that we all have an ability to transcend, right? And what's that mean? Well, maybe it's a sense of rising above the ordinary physical and psychological state. Maybe it's an awareness that something more exists beyond the palpable struggle. Maybe it's finding or making meaning of challenges or difficulties in ways that create greater strength and resiliency. But it can occur through a lot of different mechanisms, excuse me, through reason or understanding, through our action, through spirituality. But a growing body of research suggests that transcendent experiences are more common than previously believed and beneficial for psychological health. And I would argue that we actually are using this on a daily basis, whether or not we realize it or not. We are transcending in ways away from our toil and our stress and struggle. We're using this more than we know. So I want to use an example. This was a kind of a unique one a few years ago. We have friends that come in town once a year. We go to their place, and they were in town, and we were at a football game, and we were going down to pick up the rest of our families. And my friend and I grabbed our NV. By the way, when you have 10 people in your family, you have a bus. That's what the DMV calls the Nissan NV. And so I had thrown the umbrellas in. It was raining, and I put my hand to brace pulling the sliding door. I put it on the near the passenger door. And all of a sudden I realized that my hand was on fire and I couldn't move it. And my friend had accidentally shut my finger in the door. And those NV doors are pretty big, and it was latched. And so after a few seconds of screaming, he opened the door, and we realized that, well, my fingers were a little mangled. And one of them, later on to find out, was not just broken, but bone was separated, and it was kind of nasty. But anyway, so the next morning I had the half marathon I was scheduled to run here in Evansville. And I thought about, the good news is you don't need your middle finger to run the half marathon. And I decided that because I had been really getting into this idea of transcendence, I was just going to forego any pain medication. I wasn't quite sure if that was a good thing or not, but I wanted to really see if I could connect with others in a way to really transcend what was, some discomfort. And so the next morning, half marathon, is my finger was throbbing and eventually just kind of went numb. I found myself thinking about all the pain that my dad, who was having a lot of orthopedic problems, had been going through. And my Aunt Joni, who really passed away sadly last year from frontotemporal dementia, and really had lost all of her language. And so I recognized as I was running the half marathon that I still felt some of the pain, but when I was channeling their experiences and really finding myself in their place, the pain that I had really didn't matter. And so I left that, and eventually days later, it was determined that I had to have a procedure to take a couple pins, and the pins had been driven through kind of an X to straighten the bone back up. And again, I just thought, you know what, this is an opportunity to listen to yourself. And so the surgeon allowed me to go through just local anesthetic and stay awake during the surgery. And I told my kids going in, I wasn't sure how this would work out, but those Civil War soldiers, some of them had amputations with little or no anesthetic. And here I was going to have local anesthetic, and, I didn't have to worry about that, but at least I very well could really transcend and connect with them. And so that's what I did. And after the surgery, the pain was intense, and, again, was kind of not going with the pain medication. And I thought about my friend Greg, who had back surgery, really difficult back surgery, and how much pain he was in. And I must admit, the night after surgery with no pain medication was pretty intense, but I found myself transcending in a way with Greg and all the others that just put it in perspective. And so I offer this ultimately for me, you know what? The pain was still there. And sometimes it's a good thing to take pain medication. But for me it was just a beautiful experience about how transcendence in a very, very inarticulable way just became my life there. And it really took me through and connected with so many other people. So I ask you again, think of your own life, think of ways that you can transcend difficult experiences and find yourself more connected in the process. So in the end of the day, as we wrap up, we've got a few minutes left. I'll leave a few minutes for questions. The struggle for meaning that creates flourishing. We have so many resources available to us today, but sadly, we find that only 1 in 5 people are really flourishing, right? And I really think there's 3 main reasons why we're not flourishing the way we want to be flourishing. The first is that we blame ourselves so often for so many reasons that are just not helpful, right? And we really don't see the worth. I'm not talking about being narcissistic. I'm talking about seeing the worth of ourselves and others and recognizing that blame is not helpful. What we need to do is say, I'm not doing things well, but how can I improve, not wallow in the blame? And although we recognize that all of us commit mistakes and transgression, the manifestation of self-worth, the way we want to be, invokes an understanding that each person is worth that of another, only expressed in a unique way, right? Leaders influenced by their lives, helpers may influence by their hearts, sufferers influenced by their witness. But all lives have great meaning. At any given time, we are all helpers and leaders and sufferers, right? Do we see the worth in that? Do we really believe that? Or do we blame ourselves and erode ourselves in ways that just simply don't help at all? Number two, research has consistently found that the attitudes must be accompanied by daily practices and environmental adjustments to provide that framework. Back to what I said at the beginning. If we don't have a framework, we're not going to find ourselves away from distress for very long, right? The horrors of trauma must be directly and repeatedly contradicted by habits of contentment, right? So if anxiety provokes flashbacks, then positive experiences must allow for new memories. If hatred stews incessantly, then regular acts of joy and giving must replace, and so on, right? We can't expect to move into a more joyful place if the framework of our day doesn't support it. And number three, I really think that beyond self-blame and habitual practices, there's really one fear that prevents us from being much more of a joyful people, right? More people really can experience joy if it wasn't for the level of fear that we feel, right? It's the catacombs of ourselves. It's really, we get stuck and find ourselves buried underneath our fear. Now, as I said to kids and adults, fear is a really good thing when it mobilizes you to be safe in a reasonable way. If you don't feel fear when you're running towards the interstate, something's wrong. But what I'm talking about here are unnecessary fears, unhealthy fears. I'm speaking of fear as resistance, right? So whether it's born of stigmatization or alienation or condemnation or objectification, there's a dictatorial nature of fear that really has no limit. And in order to find meaning and transcendence, aspects of forgiveness, these are the 5 movements: forgiveness, channeling, altruism, gratitude, and transcendence, right? Excuse me, the last one. Those are the mechanisms of moving through fear, right? I said to you at the beginning, the reason for movement, as how I describe these, is that if we remain static, we're always falling behind. And so working through fear is really working through resistance. And that's where these movements come into play. And so in the end, I wanted to create what I thought was just this idea. As you realize in hearing me talk, what I've described today is not a linear 5-step approach. It's a continual, dynamic, whole being engagement that must involve the 4 dimensions of our being: physical, psychological, social, and whether spiritual, transcendent, kind of metaphysical selves. The more each dimension of ourselves participates in each movement, right? The more I integrate forgiveness throughout all of those dimensions, the more I believe the healing will occur and joy will come. And so I kind of created what I hope is an easy mnemonic. Again, the 5 movements are forgiveness, channeling, helping others, and gratitude, transcendence. And the sentence you can say to yourself, if this, impacts you or has meaning, is we are forever creating hope, growing together. We are forever creating hope, growing together. That's the mnemonic for the movements that create greater joy and less distress. And so I end with that. There's some citations and links, further on. You can find it on my website. You can find please, feel free to forward any of my information, my articles. But ultimately, thanks for your time today. And if you have any questions, we have about 5 minutes. And I hope this has been enjoyable for you.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. So we're looking at the Q&A box or the chat, if anyone has any. We do have one. Do you provide talks for children, for kids?
Yeah, I think that it looks like they're asking directly for kids. I do. I speak to different age kids. A lot of what I do is certainly with parents and professionals, but over the years, I've spoken with a number of teen groups. I saw that kind of comment about teens would really benefit. I agree. I think that, there's some adaptation to do to make this even more understandable for teens. But my argument is that these 5 movements, this idea of turning distress into joy, is beneficial for your 3-year-olds all the way through your 103-year-olds. How we go about putting it into place might adapt and change a little bit. My 3-year-old Samuel needs to understand these ideas, and even transcendence is something that it's amazing. We don't give credit for our preschoolers, but they have an ability to even understand ideas like that if presented well. So.
Any other questions? And as I mentioned, if you even want to unmute, I think you can do that, and you can ask in person as well, so to speak.
So I see foster kids struggling to normalize and understand their experiences are so out of context of the normal world. I think that's, you think about these kids, one of the most powerful things, if you're not familiar with what's called KIPP academies are academies all across the country. And they use a lot of these ideas. These overlay with a lot of the basic principles of KIPP academies. These are often kids who've experienced some of the worst, most unstable situations you can imagine. But their outcomes are really amazing. If you check it out, what they do for these kids long term, what it proves to us and what Head Start found out 50 or 60 years ago is that the concepts that we're teaching here could absolutely, they can be taught. And if kids learn these concepts and these ideas, no matter even intellectually or otherwise, they are able to actually use them. So that's the great thing, is that these are for all people, for all kids, no matter what situation. So I see a comment says, this information seems difficult to convey to others if one isn't engaged in these practices and experiencing joy themselves, must practice what we preach. I do agree. The most powerful model that we can provide, the most powerful intervention we can provide is the model of ourselves, right? And I think that anyone who practices these for any time at all recognizes that we all need to grow, right? I have learned so much from my families that's embedded in what you heard here. And there are so many times I'm sitting here in session working in a collaborative way with families, and I recognize, I hear this voice go, you need to grow, you need to be growing in this too. Like, you need to get better at what you're saying. And I know it. But you're right, to really embody this, to really pass this along, you really have to practice it yourself, right? It looked like there was a question about putting one of my slides up. I'm trying to figure out, let's see here. If I can share my slides. Was there a specific question about one of the resources?
And we'll be resending the slides out if needed as well.
Yeah, so let everybody know if they're wanting to get any of that information, you'll be getting all of that in your slides. And again, it's on my website too. And it's KIPP Academy with a P, 2 P's at the end, I'm pretty sure, KIPP. Check out their websites though. Many of these areas that I'm describing, they're using that research to teach kids how to grow up with these ideas. And then they find that the outcomes, not just educationally, but in so many ways, are tremendous. Thanks for all the positive comments. I really appreciate it. I know in some ways it can kind of be a heavy subject at times. I always wonder, like on the other end, especially if I can't see you, I think, I don't know, is this too much? Is this not good? I don't know. But as with everything, I just lay it out the way I feel called to lay it out, and take your feedback and hopefully improve as I go forward. So I appreciate all of your positive comments and everything else too.
And we, as always, appreciate your working with us and always being so flexible and willing to help. I'm sure that we will have Dr. Schroeder back again at some point. He has lots of wonderful trainings. So, please stay on the lookout with our website, social media, as I mentioned before. And this is also going up on our YouTube channel, which, Kathy, is it just do a search for Prevent Child Abuse Indiana on YouTube?
Yes, they can do the search for YouTube. It'll also be on our website, so they can watch it from there. It'll link to the YouTube channel.
And is that available real quickly is that just public, which is totally fine? Is that public viewing? Can anyone click into that and see that? Like if I wanted to use it or somebody else could we find
Yeah,
that?
anybody that wants can click on it and watch it.
If you could pass it along to me, that would be great too. It's nice to have a recording sometimes. Others ask for it, but it's difficult to have the time always to do it. So thank you.
Sure, I can do that, Jim.
It'd be great. Yeah, I like this last comment. Foster kids at times focus on what is and has been wrong in their lives. And I appreciate this is a nice way to try and move focus to positive thinking. That's a great point, right? Is that it's not that we shouldn't be, again, real about what's happened, but what we gotta give people hope. No matter where your children are coming from, no matter what the situation, the very first thing, and I'll leave with this story, and I know that we're wrapping up here. I remember about 10 years ago, there was a panel at Riley Children's Hospital that was focused on autism spectrum disorders. And I was a pretty young professional at that time. And one of the people on the panel was a mother of an adult with an ASD, an autism spectrum disorder. And she was asked, she said, what's the most important thing that we as professionals should give to you or work with you in order to help you? And she said one single word, and that word was HOPE. And the word hope just rang through me. And I thought, gosh, sometimes when you're giving difficult news or you're working with people, it's not always easy to do that. But from that point forward, I've never forgotten that experience. And I think all of you on this today, you always have an opportunity to give people hope. No matter what kids have been through, no matter what people have been through, we are agents of hope. We're agents of healing and hope in that way. And so that story has forever kind of guided me in many ways that I speak and work there. So I'll leave you with that thought.
Thank you. You're leaving us with hope, right?
Absolutely, for sure. It's a beautiful day outside.
So I think there were some questions, more thank yous. And then something about the link as well. And we'll try to see what we can do about that for the handouts. I'm not sure why the link isn't working, but we'll try to look into that.
Yeah, I'll make sure and have an active link on the email that also has your survey.
Okay.
So I hope everyone has a wonderful, wonderful day and a wonderful weekend. I think the weather's supposed to be pretty good throughout the state. So hopefully you can get out and do a little walking or gardening. Well, I don't know about gardening yet, although I know my tulips are coming up, those silly flowers. They think it's spring already.